everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare-related topics, where I attempt to answer a question that you've sent in by email or postcard or commenting on a previous video or podcast. And you can ask anything ancient warfare-related, and I will attempt to answer it. No guarantees. Hopefully food for thought at the very least. You can, of course, back us on Patreon / Ancient Warfare Podcast, and you can back us at one of three different levels: Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. And with Optio and Centurion, you can get a copy of the magazine either digitally for Optio or physically for Centurion. And you can, of course, listen to the big podcast, and you can listen to the Ancient History podcast these days too. Right, now, today's question is from Christopher, and he says, why didn't adversaries to Rome, especially in the Italian peninsula, see the methods by which Rome consistently recovered from defeat and try to emulate them? Ooh, nice. So it's an interesting one because I think it's actually the other way round. One of the things that Rome is so good at is adopting and adapting other cultures, not only military, but especially in this sense, military formations, ideas, weaponry, and using them to their own advantage to the extent that they surpass the original. So if we look at the conquest of the Italian peninsula specifically, what you have is this city, and then, its surrounding allies, then the Latins, then the Etruscans, the Volsci, the people, all of these different cultures. Rome comes into contact with them, fights them, sees that what they are doing is superior to what Rome is doing at the time, and then adopts it themselves. So, for instance, when you look at some of the Samnite frescoes, none of them wear swords. They've got spears, they've got armor, they've got greaves and shields. They're not carrying swords. And from the very earliest time, the Roman legionary is a swordsman who happens to also have a pilum or a hasta, spears or javelins. And even that idea of the Romans going, oh, we'll have throwing spears and thrusting spears and swords, seems to be an adaptation from what they've encountered, that if you just have thrusting spears, you haven't got any missile troops. If you just have throwing javelins, you haven't got the durability of a thrusting spear. And so what you get with the hastate, principes, and the triarii is a combination of those things. And the way that, which we still don't understand, how the units within the Roman legion swapped lines and fell back through one another, again, is probably something they've seen happen and have adopted and adapted, possibly in their encounters with Pyrrhus of Epirus and also his uncle a few decades earlier, Alexander of Epirus, that they can see that the way that the Hellenistic phalanx is developed, it allows gaps to be appearing in their line, and they can fall back through and advance through that. And that comes into the manipula and the cohortal design of the legion as it develops. So I think what you've got therefore is some rigid Italian armies not recognizing that Rome is adopting and adapting and taking the best bits of other cultures they've encountered to come and fight. And so you almost get a superiority complex of the enemies of Rome, who eventually get defeated, that they've done better than you have. There might also be, when they first encounter Rome, that they consider their own way of warfare superior. And obviously, eventually they learn that to their detriment. But again, that's a centuries-long process of the decline and fall of some of these cultures. And so, it's not it's over. We find them fighting on. I think I said in an earlier podcast, the idea of it being inevitable because of Rome's mindset of never giving up and the perseverance of Rome. And I think that's something else that's happening in Rome's adaptations and adoptions of weapons and technology, is that it has a determination to keep going when other cultures might sue for peace and look for a compromise. Rome doesn't. Having said that, one of the things that Rome, of course, starts to do is build up allies who remain remarkably loyal in the face of, invasion and other allies becoming disloyal. They stay loyal. And in the accounts of some of these battles and wars we've got, Livy especially and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, our main sources, do talk about that the wars, especially the social war. Is it the social war? Latin war. Social war. Wrong one. That's later. Yes, sorry. That, the men are the same, that they are armed the same, they fight the same, that until this essentially civil war occurred, they were fighting side by side as Roman legion and allied legion. And so the difference between them isn't weapons, isn't ways of fighting, it's attitude, and it's the Roman attitude that prevails in those situations. So I think there's an arrogant, it's odd because there's an arrogance to Rome in the sense of when Rome writes treaties, it places restrictions on other people, not itself. And it's always other people to blame for breaking treaties that mean Rome has to go to war with them. And so, if we look at the Roman perspective and accept it, it's a Roman empire built in self-defense. Rome's never the aggressor. Rome's not always the aggressor, but Rome's very often the aggressor and looking for pretexts to aggress. Oh, nice. But I think there's also an arrogance from the enemies of Rome who say, we are as strong. And again, Livy gives us some of these speeches. We're as strong as they are. We have a culture and an army that's as good as them. And so I think there's an arrogance in their trust in their own fighting style that is defeated by a Roman fighting style that is as good and often better because they've adopted and adapted different ways of fighting. Part of that is, it's controversial today to talk about the Italian phalanx or the hoplite phalanx of Italy, war bands. But one of the things, of course, that seems to happen is that in many of the lines, line cohesion is important, whereas what the Romans develop in the maniple and the cohort is a subset which can fight independently of the rest of the line. And if it's cut off from the line, it can still fight on. And that seems to be a massive advantage fighting against other armies. I was looking at coming up in an episode of the issue of the magazine is Siccius Donatus, who leads a cohort. It's anachronistic. It's in the 350s. Is that right? 450s BC. And it's called a cohort by Dionysius of Halicarnassus, which hang on, that's a bit early for a cohort. But anyway, it's a group of 800 men that he leads against the Aequi, and they're defeated by this unexpected attack by a small unit of men, whereas their army actually outnumbers the Roman army man for man. So that's something that happens. It's also something, for instance, the oval scutum seems to be adopted by the Romans really quite quickly after the Gallic invasion and the Battle of Allia in 390/387 BC. And it's an amazing mindset to think about of, oh, that's a very good technology. Let's take it and use it. And to replace the technology that you had yourself before that. When you look at even the 20th and 21st century history of weaponry and armor, for instance, helmets, most nations keep their helmet, even when another nation doesn't have the same helmet. And, there's arguments about which are the better helmets for whatever reason. Similarly, with weaponry, they stay with a inferior weapon because it's their national weapon, as opposed to someone else's superior rifle, for instance. There are some exceptions. The massive number of Kalashnikov knockoffs, the AK-47, is a recognition of, oh, that's a good weapon. Let's have one of those. And I think the Romans do that on a far wider basis. Oh, those are better than what we had before. Let's use that. Oh, that's a good sword. Let's use that. And it's a really fascinating attitude that they display by being able to do that and sponging off their enemies and their surroundings. But I think it's one of the things that leads to such an amazingly adaptive and flexible military system, which of course becomes world conquering. So I think it's not, why didn't Rome's adversaries adopt Romans' methods? It was Rome adopting its adversaries' methods and then proving better than them in their adaptation. Yes, that's the right point. Okay. I hope that answers your question, Christopher, and I look forward to seeing you on another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.